from the heart of our nation's capital, here's Family Research Council President Tony Perkins.
Welcome to Washington Watch. Coming up on this Wednesday edition, last night in a bipartisan vote, the House of Representatives censured Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib for her repeated anti-Semitic comments.
Representative Tlaib has stoked anti-Semitism in this nation and undermined our national security. I ask my colleagues to support this resolution to show the world, especially our adversaries, that the United States stands behind our allies and will not back down to terrorists.
That was Georgia Congressman Rich McCormick prior to last night's vote. Now, this was a significant act by the House, and we're going to talk about it with Tennessee Congressman Tim Burchett. Also, in March, Nashville Police Chief John Drake acknowledged a manifesto from Audrey Hale, the transgender killer that took the lives of 6 people, including 3 9-year-olds at Covenant School.
We have a manifesto. We have some writings that we're going over that pertain to this day, the actual incident. We have a map drawn out of how this was all going to take place. There's right now a theory of that we may be able to talk about later, but it's not confirmed, and so we'll put that out as soon as we can.
Now, that was in March, but authorities have refused to release the manifesto. But this week, excerpts from the manifesto were released, triggering an investigation by police. So why has the public been denied the ability to see the motives of the shooter? We're going to talk about that today on Washington Watch. Also, with just over a week to go until government funding expires, are House Republicans close to forging a path forward? We'll talk about it, and we'll also look at some of yesterday's election results where money was a major factor.
They threw everything they had at Mississippi. $13 million they threw at Mississippi. But guess what? Mississippi did not break. Mississippi did not bend. Mississippi is not for sale.
That was Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves last night, who was successful in his reelection for governor. FRC Action's Brent Kylan joins me in just a moment to break down yesterday's election. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre says the president has done everything he can to fix the southern border.
We have a broken immigration system. It's been broken for decades now, and the president has done everything that he can on his own to try to figure out how do we deal with what's going on at the border.
Well, does that mean that the administration is now ready to work with Republicans who've been trying to fix this issue? In fact, they're saying that border security must be addressed if there's going to be supplemental funding for government. Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn tells us why this is a good idea. And earlier today, FRC co-hosted a briefing on Capitol Hill regarding the World Health Organization and their alarming grab for power that began with the COVID pandemic and continues.
Emergency powers is a dangerous thing. And we saw how it was overplayed and we lost our freedoms during those 3 years. Well, now the effort by President Biden is to give that power of declaring an emergency at the international level to the most untrustworthy organization there is when it comes to pandemics, and that's the World Health Organization.
That was former Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, now dean at Regent School of Government, and she's the chair of the Family Research Council, and she joins me later here in studio. Our word for today comes from 2 Timothy chapter 4, as Paul gives his final instructions to Timothy. I charge you, therefore, before God and the Lord Jesus Christ, who will judge the living and the dead at his appearing and his kingdom, preach the word. Be ready in season and out of season. Convince, rebuke, exhort with all long-suffering and teaching. In other words, Paul says, proclaim the truth when it's welcomed and when it's not, when it's convenient to you and when it is inconvenient. He continues, for the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, because they have itching ears, they will heap up for themselves teachers. But you, be watchful in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. Paul tells Timothy, despite those who turn from the truth, don't change your message. Rather, endure the affliction, whether it be ridicule, rejection, or outright persecution, and keep declaring the truth. For more on our journey through the Bible, go to frc.org/Bible. Tuesday's election results are in, and they did not match what many Christians prayed for and worked for to achieve. In Ohio, voters approved Issue 1, which legalizes abortion through all 9 months in the state constitution. Also, Issue 2 was approved, which legalizes recreational marijuana for adults. In Kentucky, a pro-life candidate for governor fell short in his election bid. In Virginia, voters by narrow margin handed full control of the state legislature to Democrats. So, what's this picture tell us? Is it a snapshot or a trend? Joining me now in studio to discuss this and much more, Brent Kylan, Vice President for Strategic Initiatives here at the Family Research Council, and he's with FRC Action. Brent, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thanks, Tony. Good to be with you.
So, big picture, what is your reaction to the overall results from yesterday's election?
Big picture, I'm kind of looking at two things, Tony. One is the candidate side and all of those races that we saw yesterday, and one is what was the impact of yesterday specifically on the life issue. You mentioned Ohio. If you look at just the candidate side, my perspective is that not that much actually changed. We're hearing a lot of headlines out today. I'm not saying there were no discouraging things that happened, but if you look at it overall, all the states that have had these elections this year, you have the Democrats who picked up control in the Virginia State House. They already had the state Senate,
right.
So they picked up that one chamber. Republicans picked up the governor's seat in Louisiana a couple weeks ago,
right.
So that's a net pickup for them. Everything else basically stayed where it was. We did have a Democrat governor win in Kentucky, but he was an incumbent.
Right.
It's very, very difficult to beat an incumbent. You look at Tate Reeves, Mississippi, very pro-life governor. Actually, we had that Dobbs decision coming out of that state, very vocal on that. He won by about the same percent. He won by his first term, things like that. So.
And that's despite the money. I mean, this election was about a lot of money, wasn't it?
It absolutely was. Actually, in the final weeks, the Democrats poured in millions of dollars into that seat. You don't make a strategic decision like that late if you don't think maybe you have a chance to win. They did that, but they still came out. He came out with that 5-6 point victory there. So absolutely a lot of money spent in Mississippi.
So let's talk a little bit about Virginia, because a lot of people are saying that Governor Youngkin failed here because he was trying to get he wanted to win the Senate, wanted to keep the majority in the House. He didn't win the Senate, although I think they did pick up a seat in the Senate.
Yes.
And so I think right now we're 51-48 in the Virginia Assembly.
That's right. That's right. So it does look like the Republicans picked up one seat in the Senate, didn't pick up that majority, but that's 21-19. So that's really, really close. And then the Democrats have a 51-48, couple seats still to be called there. But you look at that, and they went in with close majorities on either side. The Republican majority they went into yesterday with was a very narrow one. And historically, Tony, in Virginia, this is the norm. So for the Democrats to pick this up,
it's like a ping pong match.
It is. We remember 6-ish years ago, maybe it was, where that state House of Delegates control came down to pulling the name out of a bowl because it was tied. So this is pre-Dobbs and things like that.
So let's talk a little bit then about turnout. What was turnout yesterday in the overall average turnout across the nation in these elections?
It really does depend on the state. It tended to be low. And again, you have to take that by state. You have some states like Mississippi where early voting is very limited. You have other states like Virginia where it's like, I think, 45 days. But one state I'll give you specifically is Kentucky. Okay, pretty red state there. The numbers I'm seeing there is that turnout was 30%. Okay, so you're talking about turnout levels in these off-year elections that's just dramatically lower than your presidential election cycle, for example.
So only 3 out of every 10 voters showed up.
That's right. That's right. And Governor Beshear, who won re-election, the Democrat. So if you had 5% more people voting the other way, that would have shifted that whole outcome.
So it really does come down, and even these races in Virginia, many of these yet to be called, although it looks like the Democrats will have the majority there, but very narrowly winning.
That's right.
In some of those seats. And this, once again, just shows us how important voter participation, voter turnout really is.
It really does, Tony. We saw a number of examples of that yesterday. We had this election database that came out earlier this year where one group identified about 600 races historically in America that have been tied, and most of those in recent years. So it really does. It really does. Every vote matters.
So let's talk. We just got a couple minutes left here. Brent Kylan, Ohio. Issue number 1, putting abortion into the Constitution. This is the 7th initiative that the pro-abortion crowds have won. They're now, declaring that this is the trend. This is what we're seeing, and they're saying this is going to be a 2024 election issue. And clearly, Ohio is a conservative-leaning state. Mm-hmm. It's a pro-life state. Again, money. I mean, this was a place where George Soros poured millions of dollars into the state. And, we had Attorney General Dave Yost on the program earlier in the week. There's something that's happened in politics in the last really 10 to 15 years, is that as we've moved from liberals to leftist, they're unhinged from the truth. They're untethered from the truth. They just distort the facts and scare people into voting. And people just got to quit listening to legacy media and to these ads.
It's exactly right, Tony. There's a number of things about Ohio that I think are important. It is discouraging, that measure passed 56 to 43%, I think. So we need to acknowledge that. And I think next year, 2024, is a huge issue for the life issue. So we need to be seeking God's wisdom. How do we address this? But like you said, we got outspent. The last numbers I saw were $42 million to $30 million. And if you look at some of the lies that were being pushed, people were saying that women would lose basic health care, life-saving care, which is absolutely not the case. So we have our work cut out for us there.
And I think, the way we're going to prevail is the same way we got to the place of Dobbs. That is, it took 50 years of winning hearts and minds, care pregnancy centers. In fact, I'm going to be emceeing our local care pregnancy center, Caring to Love Ministries, tomorrow night in Baton Rouge. We've got to continue the work. Our work is not over. It's really in many ways just beginning.
It's true, Tony. What came to mind for me this morning as I was kind of reflecting on those results was that verse, "Be not weary in doing good, for in due season we will reap if we faint not." So the only question we have to ask ourselves is, what is good? Because then there's a promise. If we don't faint, we will reap. So I would encourage people with that. And I would say if you have been watching but maybe haven't participating, we need your voice now.
Right.
We need you to pitch in. We need you to do everything you can. I do think the tide will turn. We're seeing some early indications of that, I think. But there's a lot of work cut out for us to do.
Well, just one is the elections, where 30% turnout. We should take advantage of the low turnout by turning out. If conservatives, pro-life voters will turn out, we can flood the zone, if you will, and we can win these elections. But you've got to listen to the truth and act upon it. Brent Kylan, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Appreciate it, Tony. Thank you.
All right. Well, folks, I do hope you're registered to vote. This is an election year. We're going into an election year in 2024. You need to be informed and engaged. The future of the republic depends upon it. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk with Tennessee Congressman Tim Burchett as we're going to look at what the House did last night in censuring Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. That's next.
Everything we do begins as an idea. Before there can be acts of courage, there must be the belief that some things are worth sacrificing for. Before there can be marriage, there is the idea that man should not be alone. Before there was freedom, there was the idea that individuals are created equal. It's true that all ideas have consequences, but we're less aware that all consequences are the fruit of ideas. Before there was murder, there was hate. Before there was a Holocaust, there was the belief by some people that other people are undesirable. Our beliefs determine our behavior, and our beliefs about life's biggest questions determine our worldview. Where did I come from? Who decides what is right and wrong? What happens when I die? Our answers to these questions explain why people see the world so differently. Debates about abortion are really disagreements about where life gets its value. Debates over sexuality and gender and marriage are really disagreements about whether the rules are made by us or for us. What we think of as political debates are often much more than that. They're disagreements about the purpose of our lives and the source of truth. As Christians, our goal must be to think biblically about everything. Our goal is to help you see beyond red and blue, left and right, to see the battle of ideas at the root of it all. Our goal is to equip Christians with a biblical worldview and help them advance and defend the faith in their families, communities, and the public square. Cultural renewal doesn't begin with campaigns and elections. It begins with individuals turning from lies to truth. But that won't happen if people can't recognize a lie and don't believe truth exists. We want to help you see the spiritual war behind the political war, the truth claims behind the press release, and the forest from the trees.
All right, last night, the House voted to censure Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, providing a formal rebuke of her extreme anti-Semitic rhetoric. 22 Democrats actually joined the majority in voting to censure Tlaib, who remains unapologetic for her use of the chant "From River to the Sea," which has long been an anti-Semitic rallying cry employed by Hamas. Join me now to discuss this and much more, Congressman Tim Burchett. He serves on the House Oversight and Accountability Committee and the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He represents the 2nd Congressional District of Tennessee. Congressman, welcome back to the program. Good to see you.
Great being back with you. Thank you.
So you voted in favor of censuring Congresswoman Tlaib. Tell us why.
Well, her language, we all have a First Amendment, but you still, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, and it has consequences. What she says, we're United States congressmen or women, whichever the case may be. And what we say is we need to be held accountable, and dadgummit, she needs to be held accountable. This is just going on and on and on, and she does the usual thing. She says she's sorry. This time she never even said she was sorry, but this anti-Semitic behavior to me is offensive and it's repulsive, and it needs to stop. And the Democrat leadership needs to say this is enough, and it's disgusting to me. It ought to be very disgusting to Jewish folks that are Americans and people around the world that look at America as that shining city on a hill.
It's troubling that you would have a member of Congress, and I agree with you. We have a First Amendment right. I served in our nation's military to protect that right. I've served as a police officer, and I know you've served as a public servant to do the same. But there are red lines. There are responsibilities that come with leadership. And this is actually, she's speaking out in support of a terrorist group. So I'm grateful that the Congress has drawn a line and said, hey, you've crossed the line. It won't be tolerated.
No, and it won't be. Unfortunately, we don't have the guts to kick her out. But the truth is this anti-Semitic behavior and terrorist favoring groups have infiltrated our government. We have a State Department. I found out in through testimony and some detective work by some folks in my office that our own State Department, Tony, is actually funding some of these terrorist organizations, and they claim they didn't know. And dadgummit, if they just Googled the organizations that they were sending money to, and if I can find it, I'm no detective, I'm no forensic accountant, but But I swear, if we can't do better than that, when we've got it, in our college campuses, what's going on there in our public institutions, Harvard and Yale, I don't, they're private institutions, but, in the University of Tennessee, when I get reports of anti-Semitic behavior there or other places, to me, every time you write a check to one of these colleges or universities, folks ought to put a string attached to it. And when they pull this garbage, they ought to stop sending them the money.
You're absolutely right. And the government should pull its money as well. I want to switch topics. Earlier this week, photographs containing excerpts from the Nashville Covenant school shooter's writings were leaked and later verified as authentic. You've been calling for this manifesto to be released. It is still not been released. Why?
That's a great question. It's obvious to me that, when it fits the narrative, then it's going to be released in a hurry. But when it calls into question of what's going on with and these folks that are influencing these kids and who's doing it and what they're being influenced for, it seems to me that there's always a big stall factor. And, it's obvious attempt to get our firearms. And it's horrible what that girl did. She was a girl. She was, whatever they say, transitioning into a boy or something. That shows she had a mental illness there, obviously. But, if you just look at what happened October 7th in Israel, you don't know why you need those guns with an open border and these folks coming in. It's, it is a dangerous situation in this world, and we need to be very cautious of it. And America is we're going to get caught again in another tragic incident, I'm afraid, just because of there are millions of people, Tony, that have come over our border, and there is no way in this world we know. And when we find them on the terrorist watch list, the left always jumps up and says, well, see, it's working. We caught them, And if you've ever been down there, as I have, there's no way in the world you can keep track of all those people.
Well, and we know that, over 1.5 million have evaded capture. Others have been caught and released, let into the country. And you're right, there's this effort to take away our ability to protect ourselves. But what's interesting, and again, we've not seen all of the manifesto. We've just seen a couple of screenshots. The city now investigating this to see how it was released. But it would suggest that there was some type of indoctrination that took place. There's so much of the leftist ideology revealed in the manifesto that was released. Is that part of the reason it wasn't released? Is because it exposes the poisoning that the left has been doing to the minds of American children?
Well, I'd have to think that when law enforcement says they're still investigating it, how much longer do they need to investigate it? They know who she was, what she did, when she did it. They've got most of it on film. And obviously there's been an indoctrination of this young lady, and she was obviously not mentally well. And that's who they usually see.
Well, and it's not like this would jeopardize a court case, because she was neutralized by police officers on the scene. So it's inexplicable why they have not released this information so the public would know what is behind this. And again, I know that you've been calling for that. Hadn't happened yet. Maybe it will in the days ahead.
I'm so frustrated with that. Obviously, being from Tennessee, it's Middle Tennessee. It's a little different area than where I grew up, but it's still Tennessee. And to me, it's just preposterous. There's no other reason that I can come up with why they don't release the entire manifesto and just let it go, because they sure as heck, when it fits their narrative, they get the thing out. It's out overnight. It burns up the Xerox machine. They're making so many copies of it. And of course, this incident, it's pretty clear in the media in Nashville and around the state. They're already making excuses of, you could just pick and choose who she was mad at everybody. Well, it was pretty specific, and there's some language in there that you just don't just come up with. And I think that the public needs to see that.
All right, Congressman Burchett, good to see you. Thanks so much for taking time to join us today.
Always a pleasure, even under these circumstances. And thank y'all for putting out the truth, because
Thank you, brother. All right, folks, don't go away. We're back after this.
All of us are born with the desire to find truth and meaning. Where did I come from? What happens when I die? While our answers to these questions may divide us, we are united in our need for the freedom to answer life's biggest questions and make life's biggest decisions for ourselves. That's why religious freedom matters for everyone. Religious freedom matters because the powerful have long wanted to control those who are less powerful. Religious freedom matters because the freedom of those who are different is often threatened by those who believe different is dangerous. Leah Sheribu, a Christian teenager in Nigeria, remains a captive of Boko Haram for her refusal to renounce her Christian faith. Chinese pastor Wang Yi is serving a 9-year sentence for speaking publicly against the Chinese government. All of this because people in power decided different is dangerous. At the Center for Religious Liberty at Family Research Council, we promote religious freedom for everyone because the only alternative is religious freedom for no one. We encourage Americans and the American government to engage and advocate for the persecuted, and they do. We work every day to bring good news to the afflicted, to proclaim liberty to captives and freedom to prisoners. We do it because that's what Jesus does. We work to give freedom to others because we ourselves have been set free.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks so much for tuning in on this Wednesday. The website, TonyPerkins.com. Lots of resources there for you. All right, efforts to send military aid to Israel continue to stall. Senate Democrats have blocked, hear me now, they've blocked the advancement of the aid package passed in the House of Representatives. Also in the Senate, Republicans have warned the Biden administration that additional funding for Ukraine remains in jeopardy unless a solution to the president's open southern border is found. But with Democrat scare leader Chuck Schumer insisting that addressing the border crisis is a non-starter, how should Republicans in the Senate respond? Joining me now to discuss this and more, Senator Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee. She serves on 4 Senate committees, including the Senate Judiciary Committee and the Senate Finance Committee. Senator Blackburn, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Good to join you. Thank you.
So the House advanced a measure, $14.3 billion, to assist our ally Israel. But the Democrats are blocking that. What can be done to get this aid to Israel?
Well, what we need to do is continue to try to push that standalone bill and make certain that we're getting that aid to Israel. And, you know, the Democrats are wanting to put a bunch of different things into one bill. So maybe we should say, all right, you can have a small amount of money, and once you secure the border, once you have met certain metrics, then you can have another tranche of money. And once you have met certain metrics, then you can have access to another tranche of money. Now, that may be something because, you know, we need to get something for our votes.
Right. Well,
and making certain that we're holding them to account so that they are actually doing something about that porous, open southern border where you have all these hundreds of thousands of people from countries of interest that are pouring over the border.
What about the children? I mean, you've been very focused on the children that have been trafficked across that border, and it appears that they're just kind of recycling those children coming back across the border. Tell us about what you've discovered there.
Yes, and in the border security provisions that Republicans are putting forward, we have placed my DNA testing legislation. And Tony, as you know, when Trump was president, we did DNA testing.
Yes, we did.
Of every child that came to that southern border to be certain they were related to the adult. Now, what we found was a third of those children were being trafficked. That's how we uncovered the child recycling program. This is where the cartel takes a child, places them with adults that they do not know, sends them across the border. They apply for asylum. And then once the adult is in the country, they send the child back to authorities to be sent back to the cartel in Mexico. And our Border Patrol says that they have seen some children come as many as 8 or 9 times. So this is child abuse. It is a human rights abuse. And I also have the Prince Act, which will allow fingerprinting of these children when they come to the border so that we can stop this child recycling.
Tell me, how is that compassionate to allow these children to be brought back and forth across the border by the cartels to allow adults to make their way into the country? How is having a policy in place that the Biden administration has, how can that be described as they do compassionate?
And there is nothing compassionate about this open border policy. The cartels are in charge of the border on the southern side. No one and nothing comes across that border without the stamp of approval from the cartel. What we know is that you've had 108,000 Americans die of drug overdoses, primarily fentanyl. China sends the precursors into Mexico to the labs. They make the fentanyl there, and the drug cartels are the ones who are distributing this. The cartels are now active on U.S. soil. They're in Tennessee. They're in every other state in the union. Think about that. Drug dealers. In addition to that, human trafficking. Cartels have turned this from a $500 million a year business in 2019 to a $150 billion a year business this year.
So, Senator...
And these women are all being put into sex trafficking. You've got all of your sanctuary cities now complaining about an elevated level of prostitution rings in their cities.
Wide open.
Yep.
So final question here. We've got 30 seconds left. How strong is the resolve among Senate Republicans to hold the line on this and back the House in taking such an approach that you've described, that we get something done on the border?
We have given them the message that we are not going to vote for a big bill that we cannot have debate on. When it comes to Ukraine, you've got humanitarian, governmental, and military money. We need transparency and accountability. No one wants Vladimir Putin to win. We need accountability on these dollars.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Marcia. Always great to see you. And we're going to encourage our viewers and listeners to back you up on holding the line.
Thank you.
Well, folks, more homework there as we track these spending bills making their way through the process. You need to speak to your senators and your congressmen to hold the line. I mean, we've got to address this border issue. It is, I mean, it's not a cure-all, but it certainly is fomenting a lot of problems in our culture, in our country. All right, when we come back, former Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann joins me to discuss the World Health Organization and their massive power grab. That's next here on Washington Watch. Don't go away.
The world is hurting. Streets are filled with crime. Families are broken. Sin is celebrated, and God is mocked. Everywhere we look, the wages of our sin are on full display. As Christians, we know that surrender to God's will is the solution to our biggest problems, but not everyone agrees. Even in church, we hear people say the most important thing is to be tolerant, that we shouldn't impose our morality on other people, and that loving our neighbor means celebrating what they do. But you can't do that. It's not that you don't love your neighbor, you do, but you care about God's opinion more than your neighbor's opinion, and this makes you different. In fact, sometimes it makes you feel alone, like you're the only one. But there is good news. You are not alone, not even close. Research has found that there are 59 million American adults who are a lot like you. There are millions of people around the country who are born again, deeply committed to practicing their faith, and believe the Bible is the reliable Word of God. But that's not all. They're also engaged in our government. They're voters. They're more likely to be involved in their community, and they're making a difference in elections. The problem is that a lot of them feel alone too. We want to change that. FRC wants to connect these 59 million Americans to speak the truth together, no matter the cost. If you want to learn more about this group and what it means to be a spiritually active, governance-engaged conservative, or if you want to find out if you are one of these SageCons yourself, go to frc.org/SageCon and take the quiz to find out. The world is hurting, and we have the solution. We can't do it alone, but we can do it if we work together. That's what we're working toward every day. Join us. Go to frc.org/SAGECON, SageCon, to learn more. That's SAGECON, SageCon, to learn more.
I'm often asked by people, Tony, how do you stay encouraged? How do you deal with all of the stuff in Washington, D.C., the negative policies that are attacking our faith, our family, and our freedoms? Well, you want me to let you in on the secret? It's called the Word of God. And that is why the Family Research Council embarked on Stand on the Word, a 2-year journey through the Bible. It's a chronological Bible reading plan with just 10 to 15 minutes a day. In 2 years, you will have covered the entire Bible. And to go along with this, Monday through Friday, I do a morning devotional that goes along with the reading of the day. It's all designed to encourage you on this journey because the Word of God, as the psalmist said, in my affliction, here's my comfort. Your Word gives me life. That is our source of strength. To find out more, go to TonyPerkins.com or frc.org/Bible. And I invite you to join me every morning for our Stand on the Word Bible devotion. Welcome back to Washington Watch. Well, earlier today, I was on Capitol Hill sharing a short devotional with members and having an opportunity to pray with him. And while I was there, I sat down with House Speaker Mike Johnson. And here's a clip of what he had to say.
So what you're seeing right now is Washington and the surrounding press corps interacting with a leader who openly acknowledges what he believes. What a concept. I mean, you know that in previous generations, everyone did.
Right.
As of right now, the polling affirms that over a majority of the American people also identify as Christians, you know, with their faith. This should not be a remarkable thing. What would be remarkable to the framers of our Constitution is that this would be controversial.
Right. Well, you want to know what else he had to say? Well, tune in tomorrow for the full interview right here on Washington Watch, where I sat down with House Speaker Mike Johnson. You can hear the full interview tomorrow here on Washington Watch. Well, also on Capitol Hill today, there was a briefing on the World Health Organization, which FRC co-sponsored. At the same time, the World Health Organization itself, their intergovernmental negotiating body, is meeting in Geneva to discuss the latest version of their so-called pandemic agreement. Now, this is something on Washington Watch that we've been tracking and talking about. The WHO and their effort to usurp authority and power from sovereign nations. And we've been calling on you to urge your senators and representatives to defund, get the U.S. out of the World Health Organization. And your voice is starting to be heard. They're starting to pay attention, but there's something about this city. You can't say it one time and move on. You just got to keep beating the drum when it's important. Well, earlier today, a breakfast briefing took place on Capitol Hill entitled The Fundamental Transformation of the World Health Organization from a Health Advisor to a Global Dictator. Joining me now in studio to discuss this is former Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, who was there. She was a part of this morning's briefing. She served on the House Intelligence Committee during her time in Congress. She is now the Dean of the Robertson School of Government at Regent University. She's also the Chairman of the FRC Board of Directors. Michelle, welcome back to Washington Watch.
It's good to be in good company. Thanks for having me.
Always great to see you come to town. So let's talk a little bit. You've been on this program multiple times talking about the World Health Organization. Tell us about today's events.
It was so much more successful than I thought it would be, Tony. We had a number of legislative directors, chief of staff of members of Congress, members of the House were present, and also U.S. Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin. I had a number of conversations with Ron Johnson before on the topic. He clearly understands the topic. His frustration level is that there aren't more members who even know anything about this.
Right.
When you said people need to contact their member, you weren't even saying the half of it, because hardly anyone on Capitol Hill has even heard of this issue before. But it's beginning to resonate, and I'm so grateful. And by the way, I've got a link, if you'd like to post it, on FRC. We have a link of the entire seminar today, and we had first-class medical people there, researchers there, Wall Street types were there analyzing the impact that it will have on Wall Street. So it was a first-class presentation. People would learn a lot of knowledge about what's going on. They could share it.
Well, we will, I'm checking to see if we don't have that link up there. We will get that link up on the website, TonyPerkins.com. And we also still, folks, have the petition to sign. I think we're approaching nearly 100,000 folks.
Very good.
So just text WHO to 67742. You can sign the petition. We're going to be delivering them. We've been talking about having actual formal hearings from some of the subcommittees as well. Any new information come forth today? I know you're so well versed in this, but was there anything new that came forth today?
Well, it was trying to tell the story to the people who are in the group and then motivate them. And I think one of the underlying messages was the urgency of the hour. You know, we've only got a little over 6 months before this is expected to pass in Geneva, Switzerland at the next World Health Assembly. So we don't want that to happen, obviously, because once national sovereignty is ceded to the WHO, it's almost impossible to get back.
Right.
So we have very little time, but we actually prayed at the event, and I didn't know the spiritual direction of the people who were there. I was just asked to pray. And so we prayed, and we prayed that we prayed for miracles, because that's what we're going to need. We asked the Lord for miracles, but we also prayed the scripture to never despise small beginnings. So God can do anything. So we are praying with the faith of a mustard seed, so that this will be known to people and something can happen. Because this isn't just America that's impacted, Tony. This is all 193 nations in the United Nations, virtually every person on Earth.
Right. So the link is on the website, TonyPerkins.com, so you can actually watch it at TonyPerkins.com. Several things you brought up there that I want to address. One, I'm going to step back for just a minute. You said you prayed.
Yes.
Now, you were in Congress for how many years?
For 8.
For 8 years. Have you sensed, I mean, I know things are bad, but there's my observation over the 20 years I've been here is that there is a growing openness.
Yes.
And even desire for the spiritual. Just as I mentioned in the opening, that I was up on Capitol Hill speaking to the Republican Study Committee. I had a devotional, prayed for them, and just there's an openness that I'm seeing here that's just seems to be increasing.
Well, because I think in some ways we were told to be embarrassed of our faith before. That's what the left tried to tell people who were of faith, who served here.
But that's why they try to silence. That's why they try to silence
it, kind of hide it beneath your vest. But now I think things are so desperate across the world. The world's on fire right now from a foreign policy perspective. And domestically, we're crashing. And so people need answers. And so you're either a person of faith or you're cold. We're kind of in this, you're either cold or you're hot. And so for those who are hot, we need to be hotter still, to
just
lean
be
into the Lord.
And that's actually going to be part of my conversation that I have with Speaker Mike Johnson that folks will be able to hear tomorrow on the program. On this, there's multiple things with the World Health Organization. There's the pandemic accord or the treaty, but there's also the amendments to the existing regulations. These things are so far-reaching that people don't believe they're true.
It's true, because you need to have the foundational understanding of what's going on. But you're right. I mean, this sounds like a James Bond movie. You know, this could never happen. But I assure you, it's in the documents. And I went to Geneva, Switzerland for the last World Health Assembly. I listened to these people when they were talking, to the committees that are being set up. I assure you, this is planning to go forward. There isn't one nation that objected. That's what stunned me more than anything else. Not one nation objected. Did the representatives not read what's in these amendments or not read what's in the proposed pandemic treaty? But eventually what's going to happen, these two documents are going to be merged and synthesized. And the bottom line it's that every nation will voluntarily surrender national sovereignty over healthcare decision-making. The only thing is they redefined healthcare to include climate change, racism, abortion, income inequality,
LGBTQ
everything.
issues,
That's why we aren't
transgender.
far out. It sounds far out. We're exactly right when we say this is creating a platform for global governance.
One of and I've gotten this feedback from some of our listeners and viewers, oh, this is fear-mongering. I wish it was, actually. That's not what we do here. But the international health regulations existing, they've dropped the number of amendments, but there at one point was over 300 amendments to this. But one of the changes is that a lot of the provisions of the international health regulations that are in place are optional. You don't have to do them as a member state.
Well, it was meant to be an advisory body.
But they're changing
originally.
that. These amendments change that.
That's why this is so imperative, because we go from advisory to mandatory. That's why they want everyone to voluntarily surrender authority to the UN. So just like Joe Biden has the power to declare an emergency in the United States, now this would give the power at the international level of the World Health Organization. They would be able to declare an emergency in America. They could lock us down.
And it would be binding on the entire nation.
Binding. Oh yeah, and we can't go appeal to the Supreme Court.
They've already
ruled. We've given
well,
the power away. So this is extremely serious. The listeners need to recognize that.
So the other question that comes up, and it's not laid out necessarily here, so I don't in the policies that are being proposed that I've seen, but you don't have to think it too hard to come up with how do they enforce it. Well, they're the UN. They've got a lot of power in terms of
and the big dog that's been pushing this is the United States of America, Joe Biden. So who will enforce it? Joe Biden will enforce it, because this is what he wants to see. He's already opened up the office, the compliance office, so that here in the United States, we're complying with what the WHO tells us that we need to do. They've already opened the office, Tony.
So then do they do what we see happening right now with, like, Donald Trump, this lawfare where, like, let's say a local sheriff says, I'm not going to do this. Well, they send the DOJ after that sheriff.
I think what we're going to see more than anything is the corporations are going to enforce this. Because if, let's say that it is mask wearing, if the UN says we all have to wear masks, then Delta Airlines and various entities will force us to wear masks or force us to lockdown. And then that's your local officials that force you to do that. Or if it means taking another jab, then it's mandated, usually through the employer.
Well, this also, going into the treaty, which, as you said, would be merged at some point, the World Health Organization, WHO, would dictate domestic spending.
Yes, they do. That's right. Because they can tell us, they can tell any country, and it'll be the United States, you have to produce so much health care products, and then you need to give it to the UN, and then we'll give it to some. So redistribution
so we
of wealth.
become slaves of the UN.
Oh, yes. Or you have to come up with a new vaccine. You had asked me what was new. One thing that was fascinating from these doctors who were giving presentations, they were talking about the history of pandemics. Pandemics are rare in history. And so what they were showing is all of the so-called pandemics that have been declared just in the last couple of years, it's completely out of the norm of what historic healthcare. It's conditioning, because their plan is we're going to have pandemic after pandemic after pandemic. Because
so we can grab power,
so
more
you can
power,
grab
more power, more power,
and then force what their will is on the people.
Okay, so we've got about 4 minutes left here, Michelle Bachmann. Let's talk about how is this stopped?
Well, that's a good question. Prayer, first of all, because this is a spiritual issue as far as I'm concerned. This is huge.
This fits into Scripture.
It fits into Scripture, and so we need to cry out to God, and we need, and He hears us when we cry.
And let me just say this. It fits into, I'll just say this, if you look at Revelation where you move toward one world government, it fits into that. That does not mean we step on the sidelines. Oh, this is going to happen.
That's right.
It doesn't have to happen now.
That's right.
It will eventually happen, but I'm not going to.
Because we don't know God's timetable.
That's right. And plus, it's not good.
That's right. So we stand for righteousness. We have no idea, Tony, what it would be like. We've lived in the greatest military and economic superpower in the history of the world. Every day of our life, when we woke up, we had the luxury of living in the superpower of the earth. Now imagine if we are subservient to an international body and we lose freedom. It isn't just national sovereignty. This is what people need to understand. You lose individual sovereignty, personal autonomy. Government now gets control over your life and your family and my life and my family.
These vaccine passports, electronic. I mean, you won't be able to move about unless you.
That's right. And then you have the digital passport as well for money. And so everything is linked and tied together. So we literally can't buy a stick of gum without government knowing what we've done and surveilling us.
First we pray. We, I think the leverage point we have right now, because we only have one chamber of Congress, is the defunding, which that's not the whole tamale.
No, it isn't.
But it's a start. We've got to get the United States out of the World Health Organization, like Donald Trump did.
Yeah, Donald Trump did, and we were in the process of pulling out, and he defunded. But the first day Joe Biden got back in office, he put the United States back in. He restored all funding.
Elections have consequences.
They have huge consequences. But again, you've got that link. And I would encourage people to watch the seminar that we did today. It is highly informative. There's nothing inflammatory about it. It's tied to documents.
All fact.
So I encourage people to do that and then share that on your Facebook page and social media so more people will learn. Because you never know who's in your sphere of influence who actually can do something more.
This is one of those issues people have to be educated about. You need to speak to your elected representatives, congressmen, your 2 senators. Again, you can sign the petition that we will deliver to them. Text WHO to 67742. That's 67742, the word WHO. And then the link to today's event is at tonyperkins.com under the episode resources.
And Tony, Senator Ron Johnson said today, the big problem is none of my colleagues have heard from any of their constituents on this issue. So if we can start a groundswell of contacting these senators and these House members, then they can't ignore it. Right now, they don't even know this is an issue.
Need to make that happen, folks. Michelle Bachmann, always great to see you.
Thank you, Tony.
Thanks so much for stopping in today.
Sure. Always a pleasure.
And folks, thank you for joining us as well. Always great to have you along for Washington Watch. And tune in again tomorrow. We're going to have a sit-down interview with the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Until next time, I leave you once again with the encouraging words of the Apostle Paul found in Ephesians 6, where he says, when you've done everything that you can do, when you've prayed, when you've prepared, and when you have taken your stand, by all means, keep standing.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is brought to you by Family Research Council and is entirely listener-supported. Portions of the show discussing candidates are brought to you by Family Research Council Action. For more information on anything you've heard today, or to find out how you can partner with us in our ongoing efforts to promote faith, family, and freedom, visit tonyperkins.com. Also, to leave a comment about Washington Watch, Call our watch line at 1-866-372-7234. That's 1-866-372-7234.